a teenage film snob, baby. I was a teenage film snob, baby.
Tournament is over, and the heroes of Earthrealm have returned home. Their happy return is short-lived, though, when the Emperor of Outworld, Shao Kahn, launches a full-scale assault on the Earth. Kitana, Melina, Sub-Zero's brother, Scorpion, Rain, Ermac, Shinnok, Baraka, Jade, Nightwolf, Shiva, Motaro, Sindel, Raiden, kind of, Johnny Cage, kind of, Smoke, Cyrax, Jax, and Sonya Blade, even better version of her. Welcome to Ours, a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, and this is why you should watch Mortal Kombat Annihilation. We are back. It is our second episode, our second run-through of this. We talked about Josie and the Pussycats last week, although I'm kind of thinking I might drop this one early to line up with the release of Mortal Kombat 2 in theaters. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, then I guess Josie and the Pussycats was moved till next week. I am a huge Mortal Kombat fan. I have been for decades. My first introduction to the franchise was when I was in primary school. For those of you in America, elementary school. I would have been 8 or 9 years old, maybe even a bit younger, and a friend of mine had a Super Nintendo copy of Mortal Kombat, the original kind of port of the arcade game. And the minute I saw Sub-Zero freeze someone, I was hooked. He was my guy for years. Still is, I guess, in a big bad way. Like normally when I play a new Mortal Kombat game, my first character I play as is Sub-Zero. Just something about the look, back even in the 90s, that simple like black ninja outfit with the blue stripes, freezing people. There's something very, very cool about it. No pun intended. It was a game that I had to sneak. I could not play it around my family because my dad, as I've talked about many times on the podcast, was very anti-violence, and Mortal Kombat pretty much created the rating system for games. It was so violent that parents were outraged and they needed to bring ratings in. Which is kind of funny looking back. If you watch those initial Mortal Kombat games now, like, yes, there's some blood and some skulls, but it is very tame compared to what they're doing in the games today. My experience with the first movie was exactly the same. I remember exactly where I was when I watched the 1995 Paul W.S. Anderson Mortal Kombat. I was sick home from school. A friend of mine had lent me a copy of his VHS, which he had taped off the TV, and basically I stayed at home in our rumpus room. I watched it, loved it, rewound it and watched it again twice in one day, and just really solidified myself as a fan of Mortal Kombat. And then it would be some time before I could buy a Mortal Kombat game. I think maybe I got Mortal Kombat 4 in my early teens, kind of my late childhood, early teens. Maybe around the time my parents split up and my mum didn't care what we played. And then once I was old enough to buy MA games, that was it. I was buying every Mortal Kombat game and just fell in love with the franchise. But we're not here to talk about the games, and we're not here to talk about the 1995 movie. We're here to talk about the most divisive film of the franchise, commonly referred to as one of the worst video game adaptations of all time. I am talking to you about Mortal Kombat Annihilation. So let's go through the facts. We'll go through some history. We'll talk about why people don't like it, and then I'll tell you why you should watch it. So this flick was directed by John R. Leonetti, who would go on to direct Butterfly Effect 2, Annabelle, and Wish Upon. And if you've never seen Wish Upon, we might have to do an episode on that because that's a bonkers movie. There were a lot of writers attached to this movie. So Ed Boon and John Tobias get a writing credit because it's based on their characters, but John Tobias did help develop the story. So Ed Boon and John Tobias created Mortal Kombat. John Tobias helped develop the story. He wrote all of the Mortal Kombat games, and he helped with the story of the original movie as well. Then we had Lawrence Kasanoff and Josh Wexler, and this was both of their first writing credits. So when people come back to this film and talk about the dialogue, talk about the plot, talk about the issues with the story, obviously if it's someone's first writing credit and they're not seasoned, there's going to be holes. But I don't have problems with the story. I do with the dialogue, but we'll get there. And the screenplay was written by Brent Friedman and Bryce Zabel. Now, Brent Friedman had worked on a dozen films or so before this, but they were all very low-budget horror films. stuff that you probably wouldn't see in theaters, but you would find on the wall in Blockbuster or Video Easy, something like that. And Bryce Zabel worked on quite a few things. He worked on LA Law in the 80s. He worked on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, and would go on to work on Atlantis, The Lost Empire, which is a Disney film. So whilst a lot of people involved in the project were newcomers and had worked on stuff that maybe justifies why people have a low opinion of this film, there are definitely some success stories as well. Film was released by New Line Cinema in 1997 on a budget of approximately $30 million. We talked about this with Josie and the Pussycats in the last episode, or if I move them around next episode. $30 million is a very low budget for a sci-fi action film like this. And you might look at that and be like, yeah, we can tell it's low budget. But I think they use their money quite well. We're going to talk about the visual effects a little bit later on. But $30 million to make a film this ambitious, this is a really ambitious film. There are multiple locations, and when I say multiple locations, I don't mean like inside and outside. I mean, there's Earthrealm and there's Outworld, and there's different there's the tunnels through Earth, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on. So there's quite a lot going on, huge roster of characters. So that they spent their $30 million well, I think. In terms of box office, it was a success. $51.3 million returned to the box office. Now, the way Hollywood maths works is that you have to double your budget in order to be successful. So even though it didn't hit, it made $21 million more than it cost. Because it didn't hit $60 million, it was still considered a flop because they don't take into consideration things like marketing and stuff like that. So this would have been a low return film, but $51 on a $30 million budget is pretty good. It would justify a sequel, but I think the critical reception to this film turned them off a sequel, which is a shame because we had to wait 15 years for our next Mortal Kombat movie. Now, the film's cast, we have a couple of returning cast members and a lot of new faces as well. So Robin Shu reprises his role as Liu Kang. Talisa Soto reprises her role as Katana. Then we have James Remar taking over as Raiden from Christopher Lambert, Sandra Hess taking over from Bridget Wilson as Sonya Blade, and Brian Thompson, a newcomer, as Shao Kahn. On IMDb, this film has a score of 3.6 out of 10, and Rotten Tomatoes has a 4% critic score and a 24% audience score. So vastly different from our experience with Josie and the Pussycats. This is a film that a lot of people don't like. But I do, and we're going to talk about why you should watch it, because there's so much fun to be had. But before we dive into the flick, let's go back a bit. Back in 1992, the world was changed as arcades were phasing out and console gaming became normal. One game challenged what audiences had come to expect from arcade fighters. Ed Boon and John Tobias saw a hole in the market, and it wasn't a lack of story. It was a lack of violence and gore. Mortal Kombat terrified parents with its liberal use of blood and finishing moves known as fatalities. Players around the world were thrilled by the large variety of characters with colourful costumes and special moves that set it apart from its competitors like Street Fighter. Mortal Kombat might not have been the best fighting game around, but it was visually the most interesting and the most violent. You might not know this, but the game was created by 4 people, including Boon and Tobias. And unlike most video games where the sprites were hand-drawn, sprites are the characters, and then mapped it to a computer, each character in Mortal Kombat was portrayed by an actor, filmed demonstrating a variety of attacks, and then mapped into the game later. So this is true. They cast all of their characters with actors, performers, acrobats, martial arts specialists. They had them dress in the costume. In fact, Tobias and Boone even said to them, look, pick out your costume, tell us what you think your character would do. And then they did like mocap and filmed very early mocap, motion capture, filmed them. And then if you look at the characters in the game, that's why the characters pop, why they look realistic on those flat backgrounds. In many ways, similar to what Rare did with the Donkey Kong Country series. If you look at those games, the backgrounds are all flat and all the characters are 3D and helps them pop. It's an art form we would see again in Batman the Animated Series. Whilst it wasn't 3D, very flat characters. It's the reverse, very flat characters, very kind of one-dimensional on these illustrious backgrounds. So it's a great way to make your artwork pop. Now, the franchise released 3 successful games before its cinematic debut. The first film was made basically based on the success of the first 2 games. The third game only came out a few months before the movie did. Obviously, the movie had been wrapped by that stage. The original movie was directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, who you might know as the director of Resident Evil, Alien vs. Predator, and Event Horizon. And the film was a hit with a focus on visually exciting fights, quippy characters, and a banging soundtrack, including the now famous Techno Syndrome. It was inevitable that a sequel would follow. It was huge. In 1997, New Line released Mortal Kombat Annihilation, the direct sequel to the 1995 hit, picking up literally minutes after the first one ended. As the scene opens, the Emperor of Outworld, Shao Kahn, arrives on Earthrealm and demands the heroes yield or he will take the realm by force. After a brief fray, Raiden, played now by James Remar, is knocked to the side, and Johnny Cage, now played by Chris Conrad, is killed by the Emperor as a warning. Raiden regroups with his heroes, explaining they need to split up in order to win this fight. Raiden takes Sonya Blade, now played by Sandra Hess, to find her partner Jax, while Liu Kang and Katana, played by Robin Shu and Talisa Soto respectively, are sent to help Liu tap into his animality so he can defeat Shao Kahn. From here, the plot gets pretty messy. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of splitting up. Dozens of costume characters appear and fight each other, and it leads to an epic CGI battle in the third act. I could break down the plot further, but it's real. The plot is almost not important, which is interesting because I think the plot is more complex and interesting than the first film. But this is an era where sequels were designed to be bigger and better and just grow out. You know, sequels during this era were not necessarily better than the first film, but they were bigger. They had bigger budgets, more characters, more car chases, more explosions, more blood. That's the way it was done back then. However, I do think whilst the story is messy and they introduce a ton of characters, the plot is actually an improvement, but we'll get to that. Let's dive into the complaints. Why did people dislike this film? The biggest complaints were the characters were shallow, the special effects were low budget and looked unfinished, and the fight scenes were mindless. They've also said the acting was terrible and the dialogue is awful as well. So I can't disagree with them on shallow characters, with the exception of our returning characters. Most of them don't have a lot to do. I went through the list of characters before. Some of them only get screen time. I think Ermac doesn't have any dialogue. Mataro and Shiva have a little bit of dialogue. Baraka has no dialogue. So given that a lot of them are there simply to be in the film as visual references, I can understand that critique. But I don't need to know Ermac's story in this movie. I'm just happy he's on screen. And that's something we need to talk about as well. When we talk about bad movies and what ruins a movie, people talk about underdeveloped characters. Not every character needs to have a backstory. You know? If you look at, and I'll use comic books as an example, and then we'll dive into the video game as well. If you look at comic books, sometimes a panel will be filled with 100 Marvel heroes, and some of those heroes may never get, a word of dialogue. But it's not about that. It's to say they were there. They were there for that fight. They helped the Avengers. They helped the Justice League, if it was DC. And using the video game logic of it all, these first 3 games, they don't have a story. Like, there's a story in the instruction booklet if you read it, but really it's just characters fighting each other. That's the story. They're fighting, and if you get to the end, you win Mortal Kombat. That's what it is. So when they say that the characters are underdeveloped, I get it, but I'm also not fussed by that. Now, if you were someone who was a fan of a character, like if you're a fan of Melina, for example, Melina's a very cool character, a fan favorite. She's the cloned sister of Katana, who has Tarkatan blood, so she looks like Katana, except under the veil that covers her mouth, which is monstrous. Okay, I understand why you'd be frustrated that she's underdeveloped, because we don't really know anything about her in the film other than they think she's Katana and she says, "You wish." So I get that. But at the same time, 1997, video game film, just loading characters into it, I'm happy. I am. I'm honestly happy. We'll talk about the low-budget special effects. I don't think the special effects are that much weaker than the first film. If you look at Reptile in the first film, like, he looks like a cartoon character, and that's the same here. It does obviously struggle a bit, but the whole third act is hinged on an animality battle. So Shao Kahn and Liu Kang assume their animality forms. That's your final act. So especially as the film gets older, the CGI holds up less and less. But aside from that, like the little CGI tattoos, that doesn't bother me. CGI should not make or break a film. If you're watching a movie and you don't like it because of the CGI, look deeper, because it can't be the CGI that's ruined it, because otherwise, like, all these wonderful classic films that we love, like The Matrix holds up incredibly well, but we are getting to the 30th anniversary of that film, there is going to be a day where the Matrix CGI doesn't look good. And if you look at some of the sequels, particularly Reloaded, when he's fighting the army of Smiths in the playground, the CGI is starting to wear thin. And that's fine because it's a great movie and there's more going on. So I don't really think that bad CGI holds water in terms of an argument as to why a film is not enjoyable. You can watch there are plenty of great films that have bad CGI or aged CGI. And this is 1997. Like, this is 1997 CGI. This is only a few years before the Scorpion King CGI, which I would argue is maybe more egregious than the Mortal Kombat stuff. Anyway, mindless fight scenes. Yeah, that's what I want from Mortal Kombat. That game that you could call the Mortal Kombat games mindless fight scenes, and I'd be like, yep, that tracks. That's what it is. So I don't have a problem with that. And they're cool. And I think the really cool thing, and we'll get to why you should watch it soon, but I think it's cool that we have so many different fights in this. Like in the original movie, there are a few fights. I think everyone gets like 2 or 3 fights. Like Sonya fights Kano, and she fights... No, Sonya only fights Kano. Johnny Cage fights not Scorpion, and he fights Goro. Liu Kang fights Sub-Zero, and he fights the African-American guy who doesn't have a name, and he fights Shang Tsung, and he fights Reptile. Raiden doesn't really fight anyone. Do you know what I mean? So there's like, yes, there's some cool fights in the first one, but there's not a lot of fights. So I don't think it's one fight, unless I'm forgetting something. Like, why does one of the main characters from a mainstay since the original game, why doesn't she get to fight more people? Anyway, we're not here to tear apart that first movie. I love that first movie, but I'm just saying mindless fight scenes I'm okay with. It's a mindless fighting game. Terrible acting is the next complaint. Look, I'm not here to judge someone's acting. I can't always tell, I think the bad acting is somewhat subjective. Because I'll sit there and watch stuff and people like, the acting was terrible. I'm like, I don't know, I believed it. There's definitely some moments, and it's more linked to the dialogue, which we'll talk about in this movie. But I think the acting is fine. I think they're talking about one particular character and one particular line when they talk about the bad acting, and we'll cover that now. So bad dialogue is the final complaint, and the best or worst line of dialogue, depending on how you feel, is "Too bad you shall die." Which is said by Sindel Katana's mother. And I guess that's maybe an example of underdeveloped character as well. Sindel is Katana's mother, assumed to be dead in the first film. She's back, and there's little to no reason why or explanation. So I understand that being underdeveloped. And that line of dialogue is not good. In terms of the performance, it's big, but I would put on the same level as Batman and Robin. And people might be like, well, that's a terrible movie as well. I love Batman and Robin. And the direction that the studios wanted for those films was big and bold and over the top and melodramatic. So that's just the way they were done. I don't have any problem with the performances. It doesn't make me not enjoy the film. So what went wrong? Obviously, those are the reasons why people didn't like the film. But what went wrong? Why did the film go this way? There are 2 reasons. The first, and they go hand in hand. The first is a rushed production. This is an era where as soon as something's successful, they want to pump out a sequel as soon as possible, not giving the film time to breathe. I'm very excited. At the time of recording this, I'm about to go to the Mortal Kombat 2 premiere. It's literally hours away. It has been 5 years since the remake in 2021. So they've given it time to breathe. I expect this film to be wonderful because they've taken their time. They've cast everyone. They've worked on the CG and the fight choreography. I'm hoping to have a grand old time tonight. So we'll see. But this one, 2 years, and honestly less than 2 years, because the first film comes out in August of 1995. I can't remember exactly when into 1997 this came out, but it's less than 2 years. So to do this, it was definitely a rush production. And the other thing that caused the film to go wrong is that they had to recast a bunch of characters. Now, I don't mind when they recast characters. You see it all the time. We saw it with Terrence Howard in the Iron Man films. He was Rhodey in the first one, and then Don Cheadle took over. We've seen it in The Dark Knight, where Katie Holmes was the love interest in Batman Begins, and then recast with Maggie Gyllenhaal. It's fine. These things happen. It's going to happen. But I think the problem was they recast characters that we'd grown quite attached to. So, for example, we don't have Christopher Lambert as Raiden anymore. And apparently he turned down the film because of scheduling conflicts. He was filming Beowulf at the time. Lyndon Ashby read the script and didn't like it, so he didn't come back as Johnny Cage, which is a shame because it was only a 5-minute role. And maybe, I don't know if they changed the script based on him saying no. But I think if Lyndon Ashby had come back and got killed off, there would have been a lot more of an emotional reaction to the death of Johnny Cage. Now, Sonya Blade, I'm actually pro this recasting. I love Bridget Wilson. I'm a fan of Billy Madison, so Veronica Vaughn will always be in my heart. But I prefer Sandra Hess in the role. I like Bridget Wilson. I like what she did. She brought a really tough energy to Sonya Blade. But Sonya Blade also has a level of delicacy, which I think Sandra Hess did bring to the role. She's lighter on her feet. She's I don't know what the word is exactly, but there's just something about it where I buy into it a little bit more. Like Bridget Wilson, Sonya Blade is a brawler. Like you see her like preparing for a fight with Kino. Like she is like all fists, just like punching and throwing knees and stuff like that. Whereas Sandra Hess seems to have a bit more finesse as Sonya Blade. So I actually do prefer her in the role, and she gets a lot to do in this film. So that's what went wrong. So now that we've talked about the history of the film, we've talked about the complaints and what went wrong, I'm going to tell you why you should watch it. So let's start with one of the biggest complaints. It's also a reason to watch it, is the huge roster of characters. The thing that people love about the Mortal Kombat games is the variety. And yes, some of them are just sprites repainted. Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Rain, Noob Saibot. It's all the same character, just repainted, but they're different characters with different moves. So to have so many characters in this film is a huge win. I really like that they went all out with the characters. And the one exception I would say is that Shinnok doesn't really look like Shinnok. It's just an old man in a cape. But he's in there. He's not named, but he's in there. And that's cool. So the huge roster of characters, when you're a fan of comic books, when you're a fan of video games, you want to see the things you love represented on screen as much as possible. We see it all the time in the Avengers film. If you look at Captain America Winter Soldier, when Stephen Strange gets name-checked 2 years before his movie comes out, even before his film was announced, there's a buzz of excitement for the fans of the comics. So seeing that many, even if they don't get a lot of screen time or dialogue, is a big deal. I'm going to go to another complaint, which I think is a reason to watch it, which is the large variety of fight matchups. There are so many fights. We have Scorpion fight Sub-Zero, which was a big miss from the first film. Shang Tsung says that the most mortal of enemies, and they don't fight in the first movie. So this one, we have Sub-Zero making a bridge out of ice, a Scorpion coming from the depths. He's coming back from hell, and he's got a twin-headed spear now, which is really cool. We've got Baraka in cages. We've got Motaro and Shiva and Cyrax and Smoke. There's just so much going on, so many cool fights. I love it. And they also mapped some of the audio from the game and gave some more abilities. So Johnny Cage, who only used one of his signature moves in the first movie, which was the Nut Punch, gets his shadow kick before he dies. He shadow kicks Shao Kahn. And Raiden does his flying electric launch, and they use the voice from the game. What a great little reference. I love that. There's actually stakes in this one as well. The first movie, the first time you watch it, especially if you're young, you do buy into that there are stakes. You think that the world could end and stuff like that. But going back and rewatching it as often as I have, I'm now seeing that no major heroes die. In that first one, Johnny Cage fights Scorpion, and he's challenged, but he's at no risk of dying. The first person Liu Kang kills in a fight is a character that's not even from the games, just to show that Shang Tsung can, take his soul. And then Goro, the only character he kills, is another character who's not from the games either, to demonstrate his power. So there's no stakes, which is fine. It doesn't make the film bad. I'm just saying this film took it to another level. They killed off Johnny Cage in the first 5 minutes. That's a big deal. That elevates the stakes. Now I'm scared for all of my heroes. So I like that as well. And even though it is messy, I really do like the more complex plot of this movie. The first movie obviously is very much around the tournaments, just, fight after fight after fight, and then a little bit of exploration of Outworld before another fight. This one, it's an adventure. They're traveling through Outworld. They're trying to avoid assassins. They're trying to get, they're trying to upskill, for lack of a better term. Liu Kang meets Nightwolf and learns about animality. Then he meets Jade, and she takes him, to where the eternal god, the elder gods are, or whatever. And then she betrays them. Like, there's all these cool little moments in there. There's just a lot more going on, and more than maybe a Mortal Kombat movie needs or deserves. But I like it. So yeah. So that's Mortal Kombat Annihilation. I really dig it. I think it's really underrated. I think it's misunderstood. You need to see it for what it is and remember the source material. Now, I know in the past I've said that, the film and the original source material are separate. You can't judge them on what they're based on. And that's true. This film is, it should be seen separately from the video games. But given that the source material isn't giving you much to work with, I think it's doing leaps and bounds beyond what you would expect from a Mortal Kombat movie in 1997. So to wrap up, I really dig it. I think it's really fun. Like, yes, it's silly and it's dumb. We talked about dumb movies in the Josie and the Pussycats episode. Dumb movies are important. We need them. We need dumb movies. If you're someone who grew up playing these games at a time where they weren't taking the source material too seriously, this is a breath of fresh air. You're seeing all of your favorite characters on there. Everyone you loved playing as is in this film, just about. There's so many characters. You're seeing special moves, you're seeing great fights. Everyone's wearing the right costume. Smoke and Sector are in robot suits. Do you know what I mean? They didn't change it to make it be more, just kind of follow the times and trends of movie making. They're like, nope, big yellow suit for Sector or Cyrax, I can't remember. There's 3 of those robots. It's really fun. It's silly. Yeah, there's some campy lines, but I think all in all, for a video game movie in the 90s, this film is doing a lot more heavy lifting than people give it credit for. So that's it. That's why you should watch Mortal Kombat Annihilation. We'll be back with another film soon. Thank you so much for listening. Go and check it out again. Let me know what you think. It's not about being right or wrong. You don't have to love it. You don't have to agree with me, but I'm just saying every film deserves a second chance. We'll be back next week, but I'll speak to you soon.